When it comes to villains in anime, our love for them is often deeply personal. Some fans admire Aizen for his cool, calculated approach. Others are drawn to Johann Liebert, utterly mysterious, yet hauntingly mesmerizing. Or maybe you see merit in Griffith's ideology and even relate to his struggle. Whatever the case may be, if you were to ask me what I think defines the perfect antagonist, I think it boils down to one simple idea. They need to have as much or even more depth than the protagonists themselves. I know from firsthand experience that when anime have a protagonist cast that's great but villains who fall short, the story just doesn't entertain me the same as if it was written the other way around. For a direct example of this, think of a show like Hunter x Hunter. Sure, they have their fair share of memorable and great protagonists, but to me, the villains are where the entire story comes to life. Mirum, Chrollo, Hisoka, the Royal Guards, and the Phantom Troop all bring their own life experiences and depth to the story that I would argue strongly overshadows that of what the protagonists contribute. It's series like these why I'm simply captivated by anime villains and the reason I wanted to make this video. So without wasting any more time, let's look at 3 of my favorite villains in anime and try to answer a deceptively simple but important question, that is, how do you write the perfect antagonist? Now, I know this seems like an obvious pick. Aizen's powerful, charismatic, and effortlessly cool. But what often gets overlooked is how philosophical and lonely Aizen really is. When he reveals himself as the villain during the Soul Society arc, his goal is clear: to stand above everybody, to transcend the limits of a Shinigami, and to reshape reality itself. And to understand why this is so radical, you need to understand the world of Bleach itself. The universe is balanced between 3 realms. Humans live in the human world, Shinigami in the Soul Society, and Hollows in Hueco Mundo. Everyone pretty much has their own place, and no questions are asked about this structure until Aizen. He believes that everyone, humans, Hollows, and even gods, cling to something above them to justify their existence. And when people do this, this is how gods are born. But to Aizen, gods are just symbols, empty placeholders. He sees the Soul King, the god of this world, as basically a passive relic, and he decides that he should take that place not only out of greed, but because he understands the system is a lie. And Aizen doesn't just reject the system, he acts on it. He creates artificial hollows in the form of the Vizards, he builds the Hogyoku, betrays the Gote 13, and forms his own personal army in the form of the Espada, all in pursuit of transcending the limits of existence itself. But what makes him truly fascinating isn't just his ambition, it's actually his loneliness. He's isolated not just physically, but also ideologically. The people we deemed close to him, like Momo and Tozen, both admire him but don't truly understand him. Only somebody like Gin comes close to this, seeing through Aizen's plans from the very beginning. And physically, Aizen stands at the pinnacle of his universe, only being rivaled by a handful of Shinigami. People like Yamamoto could rival him, but clings to an old ideology of the world that Aizen is actively seeking to overthrow. Urahara is somebody who matches his intellect, but has no interest in reshaping the system that Aizen wants to overhaul. So Aizen searches for somebody who might possibly understand him, somebody like our main character Ichigo. As a hybrid of Hollow, Shinigami, and Quincy, Ichigo to Aizen represents possibility. Aizen is probably somebody who wonders, could this person finally share a vision similar to my own? And I think Aizen's ideology on the world couldn't be summarized more beautifully than by his Zanpakuto Kyoka Soigetsu's abilities. As you all know, Kyoka Soigetsu has the ability to cast illusions on others, taking over every one of their 5 senses. Just like Aizen believes he has a crystal clear view of the world, he casts illusions on others just like he believes the world is trapped in them for their false sense of beliefs. And it isn't until he reaches a level of transcendence and then gets subsequently sealed where we learn just how truly lonely his character is. Although by the end of the series he's practically omnipotent and untouchable, we see that he loses that sense of drive that he originally had when trying to overthrow the Gote 13. It's almost as if he's repeating the same cycle as the Soul King, more of a figurehead than anything else. But while Aizen's downfall stems from isolation and a lack of connection, another villain's story revolves around something entirely different, and that is desire. Where Aizen seeks understanding, another commands devotion, and in doing so became one of the most controversial figures in all of anime history. When it comes to the most divisive characters in anime history, Griffith without a doubt stands at the very top. Similar to his persuasive nature within the confines of the Berserk manga, his influence almost seems to permeate into the real world as people genuinely take a number of different stances and outlook towards his character. There are those who absolutely love him and think his actions are justified, while others couldn't comprehend why he'd ever choose the path he did. But my admiration for Griffith has little to do with whether I think what he did was right or wrong. It's about something much deeper. It's about how he makes people see two completely different versions of the same person. I think it's a testament to how well he's written and just how human his character portrayal is. I mean, how else would you explain the whole Griffith did nothing wrong meme in the first place? Sure, you may think that all the crazy stuff Griffith did was absolutely heinous, like outright murdering the army that served him, betraying the one friend who he felt like he could be himself around, and assaulting Casca, a loyal follower who had nothing but respect and admiration for him just to show dominance over Guts. But in a stroke of beautiful writing and character development, Miura leaves it up to the reader to interpret whether the ends justify the means for Griffith. What was the switch that flipped inside of Griffith that led him down the path of darkness? Up to his betrayal of the Band of the Hawk, it feels as if Griffith is on a moral tightrope, balancing between his evil inner desires and the wishes to be alongside his allies. Change one small detail in Griffith's mind and this story very well could have been a heartwarming, wholesome tale of a savior bringing his people up to power. However, although he looked like he had it all together on the outside, that is far from true. Griffith at his core is a lonely individual, brought up in an abusive household to the point where he begins to subconsciously rely on companionship from our main character Guts. And when he lost him, this led to him absolutely breaking, unveiling his true nature and tipping him off the moral tightrope he had been balancing on and falling to the abyss below. That's when his character is reborn, not as a man chasing dreams, but as a being willing to sacrifice everything for them. But the main question I always come back to when I reread Berserk and look at this character is what truly makes him special? What traits about Griffith make people flock to him, want to be around him, and support him through war and all other atrocities of life? This very aspect is also one of the reasons I find him to be such an amazing villain, and that's simply his desire. In a world that's deeply rooted in causality, where people tend to settle in the roles that they're given in life, Griffith stands out head and shoulders above this. He's someone who wants to become a king and dominate the world that oppressed him, even though he was simply born as a commoner. His confidence in himself and others is so high that people really have no choice but to want to join his cause and support someone who's so willing to alter the very fabric of social hierarchy. And on top of this, his beliefs are all founded on passion and drive, which is something I think all of us can relate to. Think of someone close to you who has come to you with a passionate idea, thought, or general eagerness about anything. That passion is infectious and makes you willing to support them in whatever they're experiencing or want to try. When talking to Guts, Griffith had mentioned to him that the only people he considers as a friend are people who live for their own ideals and are bold enough to even go against him to make that dream a reality. And as alluded to before, this is kind of ironic with him saying this because it ultimately leads to his eventual downfall. But these words were inspirational enough to change Guts' path and walk his own route in life. Griffith isn't an amazing antagonist because he's just purely evil, but because he's a depiction of a real ambition-driven person. A dreamer who just couldn't accept being simple and ordinary. If Griffith embodies the cost of ambition, then the next villain we talk about represents the cost of trauma, where one man sacrifices everything for a dream, another is shaped entirely by loss. Naruto holds a special place in my heart for being one of the first anime I had ever watched, and as a result, Pain was one of the first villains whose ideology really stuck with me. The man who eventually becomes Pain, known as Nagato, watches his entire family die in front of him. Upon activating his Rinnegan, he murdered the two shinobi that inadvertently killed his parents. Keep in mind that this was ultimately an accident, but at the end of the day, it still happened. Orphaned and with nowhere to go, Nagato eventually meets fellow orphans Yahiko and Konan, where they experience the horrible atrocities of war together, learning that they want to be the ones to change the world. In particular, Nagato wants to achieve a world without war, a world without Pain. Upon a chance encounter with the legendary 3 Sannin, the orphans ask to be trained by them to get stronger and make this goal a reality. Orochimaru threatens to kill the orphans and spare them their future suffering, while Jiraiya agrees to train them since it was this specific war that made these kids orphans in the first place. After seeing Nagato's Rinnegan, Jiraiya truly believes that Nagato is someone who will bring peace to the ninja world. Alongside the bond he shares with his mentor and fellow orphans, Nagato's ideology begins with the fact that he can genuinely change the world for the better. Together, the 3 orphans form the Akatsuki, a group whose mission it is to rid the world of violence and war. This message became so popular, in fact, peace treaties were made with the leader of the Hidden Rain village, Hanzo. But after conspiring in the shadows with Danzo, he turned on the Akatsuki and waged war on them, believing them to be people who threatened his rule over the village. This ultimately leads to the capture of Konan, where he gives Nagato a choice to either kill Yahiko, the leader of this movement, or allow Konan to die. Instead of letting Nagato make that choice, Yahiko impales himself on Nagato's kunai, to which the Rinnegan user loses it and slaughters all of Hanzo's men. But more importantly, this one event is a key catalyst for shaping Nagato's worldview from this point forward. All he really wanted in the Akatsuki was peace, but all he got instead was retaliation, suffering, and pain. He concluded that lasting peace was just a fantasy and not possible for anybody. And it's this transition to a jaded, pessimistic character that I find to be so incredibly fascinating. This is perfectly encapsulated during his invasion of the Hidden Leaf Village and subsequent fight with Naruto. Although Naruto is clearly not there when he's going around interrogating everybody, he wastes no time destroying everything in sight and practically nukes the whole village. I believe this is clearly out of spite, given that it was the Hidden Leaf who were responsible for the death of his parents and were the first people to introduce Pain into his world. And it's when Naruto is physically defeated by Pain where we get potentially the greatest speech in anime history, which is the commentary on the cycle of hatred. And pretty much for the first time in the entire series, our main character Naruto doesn't have anything to say to this. We know that Naruto has dreams to achieve respect and peace with others, but he doesn't have a concrete plan on how he's going to do it. And this is the key difference between Naruto and Pain. He plans on collecting all the bijou, making a giant super weapon, and basically showing others what true suffering looks like. And to be honest with you guys, it kind of makes sense to me and is something that I can see from his perspective, but it's still completely messed up nonetheless. Pain even acknowledges that in the future, even if the world experiences a great amount of suffering, the cycle of hatred is destined to continue forever, which is really sad because at his core, he's lost so much hope in humanity, and his viewpoint is completely logical. He talks to Naruto through the corpse of his dead best friend, he lives in a nation torn apart by constant war, and he knows what it's like to be raised without parents, just like Naruto. Pain is the perfect embodiment of a villain who mirrors the main protagonist to a T. He gives us an insight into exactly what Naruto could have looked like if the path he walked on was darker and not filled with people who nurtured and supported him. And after the near death of Hinata, Naruto snaps and lets the Nine Tails take over, which shows us that Pain has now won not only physically but also mentally, further solidifying his viewpoint. And I think it's this hatred that makes the conversation with Minato so much more impactful. He tells Naruto that he needs to find an answer for peace, even though he doesn't have the answer himself. Pain has literally taken away so many important people, including Jiraiya, Kakashi, Hinata, Tsunade, and the Elder Toad. In addition to desecrating the whole village, I think being furious is completely justified in this scenario. It's amazing that this entire time, all Pain wanted from someone was a chance to talk, to be heard, and have a conversation with somebody, and Naruto was the first person to ever do this for Nagato. Thinking that Naruto would eventually break after experiencing the true pain of the world, he far exceeded Nagato's expectations for him. And this is where Nagato comes to the conclusion that in order for someone to stop the cycle of hatred, there also has to be somebody who's willing to step in, take the pain that's given to them, and break it. And so to fulfill this prophecy, Nagato decided to sacrifice himself and reverse all the damage he had done, breaking the cycle of hatred once for all. And what's beautiful about the end of Pain's character is that by sacrificing himself, he ultimately got everything that he wanted, which was peace. I know people have gone on record to say that Pain's convictions are weak since he was so easily convinced by Naruto, but it was he who showed him a better way to move forward in life. In the end, Pain's story isn't about abandoning his beliefs, it's about evolving them. And that evolution ties him back to the other villains we've talked about, because when you really look at Aizen, Griffith, and Pain side by side, you can kind of see a pattern beginning to emerge. They're not just villains for the sake of conflict, they're characters built around truths, uncomfortable ones. Truths that the world is cruel, that ambition can corrupt, and that pain shapes perspective. What makes these villains unforgettable isn't just their strength or their intellect, it's that deep down their stories actually feel relatable. And maybe that's why anime villains just hit different, because the best ones aren't the ones that are just fighting the protagonists, they're challenging us to actually look inward, to question our beliefs, to sit with the idea that if life had gone just a little differently, could the protagonists have made the same choices they did? If you guys made it this far, thank you so much for watching. Let me know any anime villains that you resonate most deeply with. And if you enjoyed this breakdown, drop a like, subscribe, and I'll see you guys all in the next one. As always, stay curious, anime fam. Peace.